This summer, during the biggest sporting event of the year, Peacock turns to two broadcasting legends for the Olympics coverage you can't find anywhere else.
I think they mean us.
With an incredible duo sure to take home the comedy gold. Olympic Highlights with Kevin Hart and Kenan Thompson. New episodes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Only on Peacock.
This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Been running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. The other day I made reference, I don't remember the context, but I made reference to the fact that everyone used to have a George Foreman Grill. And to me, the George Foreman Grill is one of the most fascinating inventions in history. Because honestly, everyone always uses that phrase, oh, it's the best thing since sliced bread. It's the best thing since sliced bread. Is sliced bread really that great of an invention? Honestly, were people paralyzed with inabilities to have sandwich when they had to slice the bread themselves? Oh, here's a loaf. I'm going to have to slice it myself. Oh, or I could give you this package of sliced bread. Oh, that's nice. And yet we use that as the expression. You want to talk about an invention that's really a life changer, the George Foreman Grill. And that's what I say. I say, whenever something comes around, whenever I'm trying to make a hyperbolic statement, I said, he or she or this or that is the greatest thing since the George Foreman Grill. Because it is so great. It was great at cooking things. And it was a little healthier. It was quick. It was easy to clean. It was easy to store. And it was marketed brilliantly because not only is it a great product, but it's marketed with the incredible genius of the former heavyweight champion of the world, Big George Foreman.
Chicken.
Yeah.
Potato wedges.
Uh-huh.
Steak.
Sure.
Paninis.
Easy.
Salmon.
My speciality.
Vegetables.
Naturally.
From frozen.
You bet.
Enjoy wider variety and reduce the fat with a lean, mean, fat-reducing grilling machine from George Foreman.
Great tasting. Healthier food in minutes.
I am such a huge George Foreman fan, I always was, but I was even more of a George Foreman fan after the George Foreman Grill. And I love so much about his life story. I'd love to get him back on this program. But I love that he left and came back. I love that he was a phenom as a young person. And then he made such a remarkable comeback as an older champion. I love everything about him. I love that he's so wacky that he named all his children George. But if you want to talk about the most brilliantly marketed item of all time, you have to look at the George Foreman Grill, because there's a lot of items that everybody had. For a while, it seemed like everybody had the clapper or the Chia Pet, right? Or a Sony Walkman. But I think most of those things went away. A water pick. What else? Try to think of all those infomercials. Ginsu knives. That was a big one. Ginsu knives. And you'd watch the commercials. They'd be ridiculous. When do you ever need a knife that's going to cut through a tin can? Hey, this tin can is really looking awfully big for me to put into the recycling. If only I could cut it in half. Oh, wait, there's a knife for that. So in any event, for some reason, I don't know what happened, but I want to say maybe about 15, 20 years ago, let's say 15, everybody stopped using the George Foreman Grill. I know. It went from something that was everywhere, at least in my circle of people that I would encounter, to something that became almost a joke, right? But I never really understood why. And about 15 years ago, I was at my mom's and I found her old George Foreman Grill. So I set it up again in her kitchen, and I started making stuff on this George Foreman Grill. And you know what? It was just as good as it had been when it was in its prime 10 years ago. In my mom's house, the George Foreman Grill had the same kind of a comeback as a cooking appliance that George Foreman had as a boxer. He's down and out after losing to Ali in Zaire, comes back many years later. Oh, look, he beats Michael Moorer. I think that's who he beat. Beats Michael Moorer, becomes a champion again. At an age most people are grandparents. He's the heavyweight champion of the world. It was incredible. And that was the same thing that happened with the George Foreman Grill. So it's one of those things that I don't understand why it's not big anymore. Maybe everyone already has one, but I get the sense that people really don't use them. I think in some ways the air fryer has kind of taken the place of the George Foreman Grill. In any event, I happen to be reading one of my favorite newsletters the other day, The Hustle, and they had, and this was like manna from heaven for me. And as busy as I was on Sunday, trying to prepare for the aftermath of the presidential attempted assassination show, prepare for the convention, research all the latest on everything. I saw they did this article about the George Foreman Grill, and everything I did stopped. The world stopped. Carmine is asking me for, I don't know, something. My wife is giving me a list of things that I need to do, and an even longer list of things that she's previously asked me to do that I haven't done. I tuned it all out because I had to read this George Foreman article in The Hustle immediately. And boy, oh boy, was I glad I did. I have interviewed Larry Holmes many times. And unfortunately, I can't play you any of the clips of those interviews because I'm having some issues with my hard drive, but we may make some progress on that today. I'll keep you posted. And Larry Holmes is, I would characterize him as frenemies with George Foreman. But Larry Holmes has made some money in a bunch of different business ventures in Pennsylvania. But I always got the impression that he was kind of jealous of George Foreman because George Foreman made some big money with these grills. And Larry Holmes always told me that George Foreman made much more with these grills than he ever did as a fighter. And when we're saying much more, we don't mean he made $1 million more. He made tens of millions of dollars more with these grills than he did as a fighter. So a lot of this comes down to a guy named Leon Drayman. He was at and this is from the Hustle article by Mark Dent. He was at the QVC studio in Pennsylvania watching his business partner, George Foreman, chat with two co-hosts during a TV spot for Foreman's namesake grill. And they were great TV spots.
This is my George Foreman family-sized grill that
No, it isn't. It's my George Foreman griddle that cooks pancakes.
No.
It's my George Foreman bacon oven, and it's making pizza.
No. It's actually my omelet maker that makes delicious.
No, it isn't. It's a grill.
Griddle.
Omelet
Calm
bacon
down,
oven.
guys. You're all right. It's my G5 with 5 removable cooking plates, so it makes all of your favorite foods, and it knocks off the fat.
The George Foreman G5.
I kind of want to get
It's
one of
the
those.
next
I never had one of
innovation.
those. So George Foreman's chatting with the two co-hosts during a TV spot for George Foreman's Grill. And the pair got carried away in their conversation, and they forgot that Foreman was standing with them. So Foreman improvised. He grabs a burger fresh off the grill, placed it in between two buns, and he starts taking a bite on live TV. Suddenly, the phones were overrun with callers, and QVC shifted into emergency mode. And that's where Draymond, who was then the CEO of something called Salton Inc., said literally a red siren light starts blaring in every corridor. So workers at the QVC studios called it going red. And Draymond says he looked on as janitors, accountants, warehouse workers stopped what they were doing and grabbed the nearest phone, taking sales calls to assist the operators who were all overwhelmed. And the fervor induced entirely by this boxer, George Foreman, and his snap decision to eat a hamburger, which we now know how that was invented, right? That was the allure of Foreman and the George Foreman Grill during the late 90s and the early 2000s, its heyday. This year marks the 30-year anniversary of the grill. And because it's an anniversary that ends in 0, we get to talk about it, right? We couldn't talk about it at the 29th anniversary. We wouldn't dream of talking about it at the 31st, but because it's the 30th, we get to talk about it. Officially known as the George Foreman Lean Mean Fat Reducing Grilling Machine, after a slow start, it became a huge part of 90s consumer culture and the world's most popular product for cooking hamburgers, frankfurters, salmon, and just about everything else. Oprah Winfrey used to use it for bacon. There was the Foreman Grill isn't just a relic from America's infomercial era. It was also a huge cash cow. They sold as many as 14 million grills in a single year. In the year 2000, QVC claimed it sold more Foreman grills than any other small kitchen appliance. And surprisingly, 30 years later, the Foreman Grill still remains a champion, which was a surprise to me. I did not know that. I thought it was the Clapper. And monthly sales figures on Amazon indicate that at the peak of the summer grilling season, the standard Foreman Grill outsold offerings from Ninja, Cuisinart, not to mention the most popular outdoor grills from Weber and others. So George Foreman made a mint with this money. So Foreman and Dryman, who had this company Salton, they partnered up in a profit-sharing deal. And the way it worked is George Foreman would receive 45% of grill profits, as did the company, Salton. And then two other people that were involved, Sam Perlmutter, who's an entertainment lawyer and movie producer, and Michael Shrednick, a marketer, they would get the other 10%. And they hoped, so the Foreman was getting, at that point, when he's getting 45% of this, he was getting monthly royal checks for $4 million. Monthly royalty checks. So ultimately, the sales just don't stop. There was millions and millions there was $200 million in sales. Foreman's taken in 45% of that. He's making over $40 million in just a year. So ultimately, they make a deal with George Foreman where in 1999, this is 26 years ago, they said, all right, we'll buy you out, give us your naming rights in perpetuity, and we're going to give you some stock in the company so that you can still do the marketing and the promotions. They paid him $137 million just in 1999 for the naming rights in perpetuity, in addition to all the royalties that he'd already gotten. So George Foreman made hundreds of millions of dollars from this. And what was interesting in the article that I read is a young person, talked about how a friend of his gave him a George Foreman grill as sort of a novelty gift, kind of a joke gift. And he loves it. He uses it all the time. And it got me thinking, I may do that. The next time I have to get a gift for somebody and I can't figure out what to get them, an adult, not a child, whether it's a relative or a friend, especially if it's a housewarming or something, I'm going to get them a George Foreman grill because this is still a great product and it's still doing well, not just in this country, but internationally. But and they last a long time, a real long time. Did you have a George Foreman grill, Matt?
Absolutely. I had one, and I'm trying to remember the last time I used it because I have other grills now, maybe 10 years ago or something.
Do you have an indoor grill, though?
Yeah, I have. So I have, it's another grill that's sort of like the George Foreman grill. And I was also surprised that you just said that it still sells because I always remember, maybe it's changed now, but you had to put that little tray in front of the grill
to catch the grease.
all the grease. And now they have one where there's just holes and a tray underneath.
Oh, interesting.
So you don't have to put a tray in front of it.
Interesting.
So I have I grill like that. Then I have the Ninja Foodie XL, which has the tray underneath.
That's a grill?
Yeah, it's a grill, it's a broiler, it's an air fryer, it's
one
everything.
Of those. Okay, I got to check that out.
And I got Tony to buy one, and he loves it.
Well, I mean, are you getting a percentage on this? Why are you?
No, I told him. He was asking one day. I go, look this thing up. And he looked it up. He goes, wow. And he got one. And he said, it's everything you described.
We should get them to advertise. All right. Hey, if you want to talk about, if you still use a George Foreman grill, I'd love to hear from you. 646-720-0635. You know what I'd love to talk about, though? Why does everyone have ADHD? It's an issue we've explored before. We're going to bring it up with Marilyn Wedge, who says that maybe they don't. 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. Back in May, I covered on this program a really, I thought, alarming statistic, which is that as of the year 2022, around 1 in 9 children had been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder at some point in their lifetimes, or ADHD for short. It's according to a new study that was published back in May. That is roughly 6.5 million children ages 3 to 17 that had ADHD that year. That is up from 5.4 million just 6 years before. If you look at a few years before that, it's an even more alarming increase. So this prompted a discussion on the radio about what's driving ADHD in this country. Why are there so many more diagnoses of ADHD? And there were a variety of theories. Callers brought up a lot of interesting points. I am of the opinion that this is something that is just overdiagnosed for a variety of reasons. Other callers said, no. The fact of the matter is more kids have ADHD because of X or because of Y. Our own Matt Blaze said, no, there's no such thing as ADHD. This is I'm paraphrasing here, but he said it's a made-up disorder that is being used to get medication, or because children want extra time on tests, or their parents want them to have an ADHD diagnosis for some reason. Well, I have to tell you, for the last week, I have been reading a fascinating book exploring the history of ADHD in this country and exploring how we treat this as a country as compared to what some other countries do. And the book is called A Disease Called Childhood: Why ADHD Became an American Epidemic. Very pleased to be welcoming its author, Dr. Marilyn Wedge. She's a family therapist with almost 3 decades of experience helping children and adolescents, and she's written multiple books, including the one that I just mentioned. Dr. Wedge, thanks so much for joining me on the radio.
Oh, thank you, Frank. I'm happy to be here.
So, Dr. Wedge, let me begin with the question that I brought up with the audience back in May. Is the uptick in ADHD a function of overdiagnosis, more accurate diagnosis, or something else entirely? What do you think?
I think something else entirely. I think what's driving this increase in diagnoses are multiple factors. One is the psychiatry industry, and the second is the pharmaceutical industry, both of which make enormous profits on the sales of drugs for the so-called condition ADHD. And also factors in the way we live. Children are playing video games more. They're on electronic screens for many more hours a day than in previous years. The fast food diets, unhealthy diets. Diet does, as I demonstrate in my book, diet does play a part in whether a child is hyperactive or not. So I think it's all that. But the main reasons that we have such high ADHD levels is the psychiatry industry and the pharmaceutical industry. Doctors in medical school are taught that ADHD is a real disease, and in feeling that it's a disease with a medication to help, they don't look into the child's social environment. What's going on at home? Could this be influencing the child's behavior?
So with that in mind, though, do you believe that ADHD is a real thing? Because I've heard from teachers and parents who say that that their child doesn't eat a lot of these junk foods that have been pointed to as triggers or anything along those lines. But is ADHD real?
Well, the behaviors are real. Certainly, there are children who are inattentive or blurting out answers. The behaviors that ADHD describes are real, but ADHD does not exist as a disease entity. There's no biological markers, no blood test for ADHD, no objective test. It really, the diagnosis is very subjective. And no, I do not believe it is real. I believe it is a grouping of behaviors, some of which are just typical of ordinary childhood, especially of boyhood, a grouping of behaviors that doctors have voted that these would be the symptoms of a so-called disease called ADHD.
I have a perfectly normally functioning 2.5-year-old, and in your book, you have a listing of the diagnostic criteria that's used in both the DSM-3 and the DSM-4 to determine whether a child has ADHD. And I had to break the news to my son that according to both of those criteria, he absolutely has ADHD, which he didn't seem to react well to, but his mother certainly disagreed with that diagnosis. So if what you say is accurate, if ADHD is not a real disease, but more a collection of symptoms and behaviors, some of which are present in normal childhood, why does the medication work? I've heard from parent after parent that says that their child was given Ritalin or Adderall, and after taking this medication as prescribed, the behavior really improved. They were suddenly able to concentrate in schools and not necessarily, experience those same symptoms that make up ADHD. If it's not a real disease, why does real medication work to treat it?
Because the medication, which is amphetamine or methylphenidate, helps anybody focus better or concentrate better. In my book, I describe how the first amphetamine was Benzedrine, and Benzedrine was used for bomber pilots in the German Air Force in the Blitzkrieg of London. Now, when the Americans found out, and then British found some crashed planes, they found that in the pilots' kits were Benzedrine pills. And they said, okay, well, we'll look into that. And then American pilots and British pilots, they were given Benzedrine pills in their kits. and they could focus and concentrate and stay up in the air longer. So it helped bomber pilots. I don't think all of them had a disease called ADHD. So what it does, it increases focus and concentration in anybody. And then, I don't know, when I was in college, Dexedrine was the amphetamine that was passed around exam time. And it was known, I in fact once took it to stay up late to study for an exam, but it made me feel horrible. It helped me stay awake and concentrate, but I never wanted to take one again. So amphetamines do help anyone concentrate, not just children with the so-called ADHD.
At 30 minutes after the hour, you're listening to The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Dr. Marilyn Wedge. She's the author of a book called A Disease Called Childhood. Really interesting reading. Dr. Wedge, in your book, you discuss how ADHD diagnosis rates vary geographically within the United States. How much do you think the cultural perceptions of childhood behavior influence these rates? And are there any examples that you can point to where cultural norms significantly impacted ADHD diagnoses?
Well, cultural norms. I think in kind of upper middle class areas, upper middle class schools, where there's a great pressure for competition to get into colleges, parents are very interested in having their boys especially diagnosed with ADHD and medicated because they will do better. They get their kids amphetamines so that when they take the college entrance exams, a lot of the children are taking Adderall. So I think there is intense pressure to do well in certain areas, and these kids are drugged. On the other hand, completely opposite in more impoverished areas where the classroom size is very large, the teacher has to deal with 36, 37 children in a classroom, the teacher can't help an individual child, a boy. She can't make special provision for that boy to have different accommodations than the other kids. So the ADHD rates in some of the southern states like Louisiana, Alabama, they're very high. And basically the medications are used and the diagnosis is used to as a method of social control, socially controlling these children.
You also, just in our conversation today, you make the point that psychiatric drugs have the power to redefine mental disorders. How do you think the financial interests of pharmaceutical companies have shaped the narrative around ADHD, and what can be done, if anything, to mitigate this sort of influence?
Well, the answer to your first question is not difficult. In the DSM-3, the first diagnostic and statistical manual of medical disorders that had the diagnosis of ADD, attention deficit disorder, there was a study that showed that more than 50% of the psychiatrists who wrote the book had financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry. You've had in past years pharmaceutical companies ghostwriting articles in medical journals.
Wow.
They really shaped the perception of doctors that there was such a thing called ADHD. There was a disease entity, even though there's no biological marker, no genetic cause has been identified. But it's hard to imagine that these behaviors, some of like your 2-year-old and like my grandchildren, if I watched them in the park or when they were younger, my grandsons exhibited all the symptoms of ADHD. So a lot of it is just normal boyhood behavior, and a lot of it is not every child learns the same way. Some kids need to walk around. I mean, in other cultures, kids dance a lot in school. They have more recess. They have more opportunity to move around and get out their energy. But our schools have limited recess, limited physical education, and kids just don't have the chance. And also homework. When they get home, instead of running around and playing in the neighborhood like I did when I was a kid, they have to start their homework. And it's absurd. 2 to 3 hours of homework in 5th grade.
If folks are just tuning in, I'm Frank Morano. This is The Other Side of Midnight. We're talking with Dr. Marilyn Wedge. I'm sorry, Dr. Wedge, please continue.
That's
the homework
fine.
issue.
Children, right, they're given a lot of homework instead of playing outdoors or, with their friends after school. They have to settle down and do their homework. And so, we don't look at children as children. We're reshaping the idea of normal childhood. A normal boy sits quietly for hours and hours and doesn't need to exercise. And if he can't do that, he's drugged.
There are some parents and grandparents, probably, maybe even some teachers, screaming at their radio right now because of some of the things that you're saying. Basically, in arguing that the modern view of ADHD has led to a redefinition of what constitutes normal childhood behavior, I'm curious how you would respond to critics who claim that this perspective undermines the very real challenges that are faced by children with genuine attention disorders and their families. Speak to those folks.
How it undermines them?
Because a lot of parents are thinking, look, I understand what she's saying, but I do everything right. I limit my child's screen time. I don't give him any junk food. We let him play. We let him run around. We're not doing any of the sort of things to stifle his creativity or his personality. And yet he still is fidgeting like crazy, unable to pay attention, unable to concentrate, unable to do things like focus in school. And I believe this is a real thing. Speak to those parents if you can.
Well, do you have a calm atmosphere at home? Does your child hear you arguing with your husband? Are parents' arguments being overheard by children? Is your child watching some inappropriate television or getting on inappropriate websites with a lot of violence and fast-moving images? Because fast-moving images have been shown to create attention loss and memory loss in children. But I have a lot of parents, Frank, I do have a lot of parents who come in and say, we're doing everything right. We have a plant-based diet, and our child never gets junk food, and we don't let him, we monitor screen time 1 hour a day. And okay, let's sit down with the parents and find out what else is going on. Has there been a death in the family? Has there been an illness in the family? Are the parents on the verge of divorce? These are things the parents aren't going to tell the doctor. And that's the big problem with how doctors are trained. They don't look outside the child at the environment. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, said you have to treat the patient in the patient's environment, meaning in their social environment, in their geographical environment. So let's get real here, parents. What are you doing that might be stressing out your child?
And in that vein, I'm curious what advice you might have for parents who are struggling with the decision to medicate their child. Are there key factors that they should think about that might not be immediately obvious?
Well, I've had so many parents come to me and say, when I enrolled my son in boxing or wrestling or basketball or swimming, he got better. His behaviors got better. Take, for example, Michael Phelps, the Olympic swimmer.
Sure.
Champion Olympic swimmer of all time. He was diagnosed with ADHD when he was 10. And he didn't like taking the medication. He felt embarrassed when the school nurse came and took him out of the classroom to give him his midday dose of Ritalin. And so by age 11, he talked to his doctor and said he didn't want to take the medication, but he had found swimming. And he went every day and swam his heart out. And the doctor, his doctor said, okay, let's try it. You get your energy out through swimming, and we'll see how you do at school. Well, he never had a problem after that. He wasn't getting enough outlet for his tremendous energy. And so he stopped taking the pills. The ADHD diagnosis went away, and we all know how successful he was.
One of the things that I found most compelling about your book was sort of the story behind the reaction to an article you had written over a decade ago, where you asked the question, do French kids have ADHD? And in your book and in this article, you talk about the different ways in which Italian parents, French parents, and American parents parent their children. And you point out the different ADHD rates in those countries. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. I went to go send a link to your article to a friend. And then I saw on Psychology Today, when I go and see your article, do French kids have ADHD? They've added a note to it, which says this post was updated with a correction on March 16th, 2020. The post and its headline had claimed that the prevalence of ADHD in France was lower than that of the United States or other developed countries. That inaccurate claim has been removed. So a two-part question, Dr. Wedge. One, what is the story with French children versus American children in terms of ADHD? And two, why would that note be needed? Why would that edit be needed to be made if what you're saying is accurate?
Okay. Well, remember what I said about pharmaceutical companies having a large hand in research. So it's very clear. My data was based on the doctoral dissertation of Manuel Vallet, now a professor, college professor, but he was a graduate student at Berkeley. And I took my notes from his research. What Psychology Today is looking at is a research paper published by psychiatrists with ties to Big Pharma. So Big Pharma shapes the way, I mean, all research is biased. You get what you're looking for. So pharma did research to show that the ADHD rates were the same in Europe as here. It's what research you're going to read. I read research that said one thing, and it was not influenced by the pharmaceutical companies. They read research where the authors of the paper were attached financially to pharmaceutical companies. It's not written by pharmaceutical companies.
Well, I think this book is really interesting. But so your understanding is that there are fewer instances of ADHD diagnosis in Europe than in the United States.
For sure. I mean, it just makes sense, right? Listen, children in France, Finland, other European countries start school at age 7. Nobody pushes them to read before age 7. Kindergarten is simply play. It's not, getting ready for college. It's much more down-to-earth view of childhood in European countries. In Finland, no child gets homework in elementary school. There is no homework. For every hour of classwork, there's 15 minutes of play, recess time, where the kids can go run around. So, yes, the diagnosis rates, despite the pharmaceutical companies' researches, the diagnosis rates are different between Finland and the United States. Now, if it were a real disease, what the pharmaceutical companies and psychiatric industry want you to know is that ADHD, it has standard diagnosis rates across cultures, because that would suggest that it's a real thing.
Right.
But the rates are not standard across cultures. And you can read all kinds of research, and you choose the one that fits with your bias.
Mm-hmm. Well, my guest has been Dr. Marilyn Wedge. I highly recommend her book. It's called A Disease Called Childhood. Dr. Wedge, thank you so much for joining me on the radio. I hope we can chat again.
Thank you, Frank. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. If you want to comment on any portion of our conversation, feel free to do so. 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Billy Ray was a preacher's son, and when his daddy would visit, he'd come along. When they gathered around and started talking, Cousin Billy would take me walking. Out through the backyard we go walking. Then he looked into my eyes. Lord knows to my surprise, the only one who could ever reach me was the son of a preacher man. The only boy who could ever teach me was the son of a preacher man. Yes, he was. Yes, he was. No matter how hard I tried, when he started sweet talking to me, he'd come and tell me everything is all right.
Son of a Preacher Man, one of the greatest songs of all time by Dusty Springfield. This is actually a bumper music selection from my cousin Carol, who actually celebrated her birthday yesterday, but we didn't get her pics until a little later. But happy birthday, Carol. Hopefully it was a fun birthday. Carol apparently has been dealing with the residual effects of some health issues, but fortunately, she says it keeps her up at night, but she knows someone on the radio that's worth listening to at that time. So happy birthday, Carol. Carol is my second cousin. So if I remember doing the math correctly, yeah, our grandfathers were brothers. Her Uncle Jimmy, my Uncle Jimmy was her grandfather, who was the brother of my grandfather, Frank. So there you have it. All right. Big shout out to all of our listeners on Talk 1400 WOND in Atlantic City, because this is a big weekend for Lucy the Elephant. Lucy the Elephant, if you don't know, if you've not been to the Jersey Shore, is a giant elephant. It's a giant roadside attraction, and it's been standing since 1881. And one of the reasons that I'm eager to mention that they're having a big birthday party for her this weekend is because it's the 142nd birthday of Lucy. It's not the 140th, not the 150th, not the 155th. It's the 142nd, and they're having a big party. They're having all day Saturday. They're having skee ball, mini golf, snow cones, popcorn. And guests can make their own campaign pin, and then they'll receive a Lucy for President T-shirt, and then cast a vote for Lucy as she runs for president. You know, we had the gentleman who is in charge of Lucy the Elephant on this program, Richard Helfand. There is an irony there that the person that's in charge of Lucy the Elephant is named Helfand, which is almost elephant. But he gave my son a Lucy the Elephant T-shirt, which is so cool. It's got a. What are you doing on my computer screen here? Is that you guys, or is that what's going on there?
How can I possibly do anything to your computer screen?
I don't know. I see you moving around, and I see stuff popping up on the screen.
I did not do anything.
I bet you didn't. Anyway, Lucy it's a Lucy the Elephant T-shirt. It's got an elephant on it, and it's yellow. My son loves it, and it says "I love Lucy" on it, so it's kind of cool. I'd love to get one of these Lucy for President T-shirts, but unfortunately, I can't make it down there this weekend. I have a lot of funerals, baseball, and sleeping to do. That's a big part, and show prep. I actually also have to record a podcast, so maybe this is not such an easy weekend for as I originally imagined. All right. If you want to comment on anything we have chatted about this hour, Lucy the Elephant, ADHD, or the George Foreman Grill, or its technical name is the Lean, Mean, Fat Reducing Grilling Machine,
This is my lean, mean, fat-reducing grilling machine. It grills delicious food in a healthy way fast.
The George Foreman Grill cooks from both sides at once, cutting most cooking times in half. It's also healthier cooking because the slanting grill channels fat and grease away from food. Seared outside, moist inside. It's perfect for cooking steak, fish, burgers, and vegetables.
The great features of my grill will make meal times faster and easier in your home.
I remember they had one episode of King of the Hill, and Hank Hill sells propane, and George Foreman is on the episode, and he wanted them to carry his grill in the store, and Hank says, "Well, no, we don't carry novelty grills," and George Foreman got really furious, got into a big feud with Hank Hill. It was a good episode on a show that I thought was just okay. Bob is in Annapolis, Maryland, listening on WCBM.
Okay,
Hi, Bob.
Great show.
Thank you.
When you're talking about the Foreman Grill, I moved last year to a ground floor apartment, and my daughter took the big Foreman Grill, packed it up for me, and you can even heat buns on top with the glass plastic enclosure, and you can make a better burger with the Foreman Grill. And also salmon, you grill salmon, vegetables, and cut up onions and put it with the hamburger. And also, the big steak company that advertises. So that was good. By the way, one of my old friends, her grandson, about 20 years ago, they were going to give him Ritalin, I guess, when he was in grade school or junior high, and his girlfriend's daughter said no, and he got over it. And that was a very good speaker, because you have to look at all factors when you're talking about ADHD. And that was different, maybe 60 years ago. So anyway, I really don't want to say much tonight or politics or anything.
All right, Bob.
I'm waiting for Dr. Sky next week.
There you go. So am I. I want to ask him about these lunar caves. Thank you, Bob. 646-720-0635. Joaquin is in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Hi, Joaquin.
Hey, Frank, my friend. Listen, we've had a conversation before, and you said you didn't like Gary Null, but I have 4 children, and every single one of my children, the school recommended that they go on Ritalin. And after I listened to Gary Null, I told my wife to take every single one of them off of the Ritalin. Now, interestingly, I have a brother. I'm going to be 65, so I hope you let me have bumper music when I turn 65 in August. But my brother says that he can't function unless he takes his Ritalin in the morning. Now, interestingly, on top of that, I'm a CDL tractor-trailer driver. And I thought, well, if that does that for my brother, maybe I'll try it. But according to DOT regulations, I cannot take it because it's considered speed. So the whole thing is that the pharmaceutical industry, they were making big bucks off of it. And so they went into the schools, and every single one of my kids, it was the teacher that first said that, they're having problems, and then recommended them that they have to go see the doctor, and then the doctor put them on the Ritalin.
Yeah, and Joaquin, I didn't have time to go into this in the depth that I wanted to with Dr. Wedge, but if you read the book, she gets into some depth about the marketing materials that the parents and the teachers and the superintendents are subjected to, that the drug companies are sending. You see these happy little catalogs of children holding an A+ on a paper with their parents, all because they've been prescribed some sort of a drug. And thank you, Joaquin. And you characterized my feelings about Gary Null. I don't not like Gary Null. I think I've only met him once. We both spoke at an event one time. I thought his speech was okay. I have nothing against him. I just have a problem with anybody giving medical advice and being held out as a medical expert when they're not a doctor. I just think he holds himself out as an expert when I don't think he necessarily, I don't think he has the expertise necessary of the issues that he's talking about. Now, it doesn't mean he's wrong about everything, but I certainly don't think it means that he's right about everything. Al is in New York City. Hi, Al.
Hey, good morning, Frank. How you doing?
Great.
Elias should get hazard pay eating all those flies and that, all over the place. Got to do something with that.
Yeah.
I had a suggestion. You take lemonade or fruit juice, put it with a little vegetable oil, and you put it like a little paper trays, but you can't because you got the boards there, but maybe on the perimeters. And what happens is they're attracted by the sweetness, but the oil gets on their wings. And even though they're small, that's it. That's the end of ball game for that, And worst comes to worst, you could always put out some Drake cakes or Junior Mints, Mackinac peaches, and then you hide beefaroni in the corner, and that'll do them in.
Yeah, I know it would get Kramer. Thank you, Al. We'll see. We're going to try this vinegar method, see if that works. Your influence counts, so use it.